First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers of this meeting for the opportunity. And the aim of my communication is to summarize, discuss, and reassess, in the light of the latest studies, the significance linked behind the introduction in the Aegean of the Naue two swords. So let's start. Named after the German painter and archaeologist Julius Naue in 1903, this sword is part of the so-called metallurgical coine. Spreading from an area located in the east of the Alps, probably comprised between the Eastern Alps and the Carpathian Basin, the Naue II opened its way through Europe and beyond, from Scandinavia in the north to the central Mediterranean and the Aegean in the south, and from Syria in the east to Britain in the west. In the Aegean, the introduction of Naue II is often regarded as a watershed in the Mycenaean combat techniques, being the metallurgical tradition of the Aegean always separated, at least typologically, from those of the rest of Europe until the 13th century BC. The Naue II landed literally on the Aegean shores among other European bronzes, likely through the mediation of continental Italy. Indeed, both regions were involved in a tight web of exchanges that can be traced back to the late Helladic I. Concerning the only other possible route, the Balkans, it has argued that the harsh landscape of the eastern Adriatic could have been impracticable both by land and by sea for a trip as such required from the Eastern Alps to Greece. Moreover, Greek-made swords have close typological ties with Italian ones, and they came along with some central Mediterranean style items. A first typological classification was thoroughly made in 1956 by Hector Catlin. More recently, another one has been made by Kilian Diermeier. According to her, there are three different typologies of Naue II, namely A, B, and C, with many morphological variants. Types A and C are identical, respectively, to the Italian types Cedona and Allerona. For the sake of time, I won't talk further about this subject, but it is important to underline that some morphological aspects can be misleading and give the false idea that before their appearance there were no swords typology suitable both for cutting and thrusting. In general, it is difficult that a sword in any era can be conceived only for thrusting or for slashing, and the Mycenaean age makes no exception. This point is explained and demonstrated by Molloy. Relying especially on experimental archaeology, he points out that there is more than one cut movement, and it depends on the characteristic of the swords. The so-called cut by incision and laceration was the one performed by the long swords of the earlier periods, such, for example, types A and C. While the cut by incision and percussion, it is the one performed by the shorter swords of the later periods, such, for example, the Naue II, but also even the F. It is worth noting that from the second half of the 14th century BC onward, Aegean warriors increasingly preferred short swords, which were shorter than the earlier typologies, namely type F and D2. Such a trend continued straight into the following periods when type F2 became the main Aegean sword of late Helladic 3B, and the G2 made its appearance in late Helladic 3B2, or more likely in late Helladic 3C. Both these typologies share and in some cases anticipate many features of the Naue II. Indeed, they are flange-hilted with parallel cutting edges, and especially, as you can see in the picture, they have a pointed oval cross-section. Moreover, the blade often has blood channels and sometimes an expansion just below the tip, strengthening the slashing movement. You can see in this area, it's very slightly the expansion, and blood channels are these on the sides. This is the cross-section. So, Molloy's conclusion is that swords with similar capacities of Naue II were developed by the Mycenaean world before late Helladic 3B. Within this frame, we should ask, was the Naue II a real innovation, and if so, in which manner? Find an answer to this question is not an easy task. three aspects must be noticed in particular. Swords F2 and G2 were used beside Naue 2. There are no known hybrid swords mixing Aegean and Italian features. Type F2 and G2 are, on the average, shorter than the Naue 2, respectively about 40-50 centimeters versus 55-70 centimeters. Relying on such data, I believe that the introduction of Naue 2 enriched the Aegean martial tradition rather than revolutionizing it. This sword, in fact, never replaced the F2, nor the less common G2, although it survived in the early Iron Age, becoming almost the only weapon of its category in the Aegean until 700 BC. Thus, considering what stated above, the new sword-centered fighting techniques, whatever they could have been in the late Palatial and post-Palatial periods, were based on longer weapons, the Naue 2, and shorter ones, namely F2 and G2. From such a framework, I believe that different warriors would have chosen different swords in different situations. The conformation of the terrain, the dichotomy between open and closed formation during the combat, the fighting style of the single person, that often had a regional basis, are just some variables that could influence the choosing of a sword. Indeed, it is worth noting that there is a strong regional variability. Thessalian-made Naue 2 were longer, sometimes more than 80 centimeters, than Cretan ones, often less than 55 centimeters. This fact suggests two fighting techniques very different, despite being based on the same typology of sword. Anyway, the same typology can have many different uses, as exemplified by the Renaissance Italian rapier, where different masters preferred different styles, often with quite noteworthy technical differences. Finally, short swords are easier to use and to produce. The last statement can be true especially for Naue 2, because in contrast with the Aegean ones, it has been claimed that they were cast in foundries instead being forged in smithies. Moreover, as pointed out recently by Steinman, short swords encourage collective actions instead of duel of champions. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to be more precise, as we have no Mycenaean essay going back to the 13th century BC, and for obvious reasons, there are no chances that one day we will find one. As we have seen, a functional explanation for the adoption of Naue 2 is fully tenable, but we should now wonder which is the general framework in which these swords were in. In order to answer such a question, it is worth focusing now on the world in which prehistoric swordsmen lived. For this reason, we must switch our attention from the technical and technological aspects of the single artifacts to the socio-economic dynamics and look at the Italo-Aegean interaction. Being the introduction of Naue 2 a conscious selection by the Aegean warriors, it is likely that the Mycenaean elites were primarily concerned in the adoption of the new weapon. As argued by Jung and Mehofer, this could be inferred also by the early deposition of Naue 2 in the Tsuntas port on the Acropolis of Mycenae, in an area that seems to be deserted after late Hellenic 3 BC. According to these scholars, the Naue 2 arrived in the Aegean thanks to bands of pirates, first defeated and then hired as mercenaries by palatial centers. While this is perfectly reliable and military frictions between trading partners should also be expected in the light of ethnographic studies, I will suggest another explanation. I don't believe that the defeat of those bands was strictly necessary. I think that we should wonder who in the palace could act as an intermediary between Mycenaean elites and the central Mediterranean warriors. The answer, as usual, is all but easy. Looking at the written sources, the category of the collectors, although quite elusive, can be involved in these processes. The collectors, as emerges from linear B archives, were rather ambiguous characters. They were owners of different private activities, such as the production of textiles. They are also connected with trading activities. States Barnes. The exact identity of these individuals remains unclear, as reflected in other description of them as owners or beneficiaries, and their potential to disrupt the system may be seen in their elusive status as outsiders who engage with the palatial administration. In the light of these statements, it is perhaps too tempting to connect in some manner the activity of the collectors not only to trade that I intend to be at least in part as a private activity, but also to the hiring of Italian mercenaries for different purposes, such as escorting ships and or enrich the palatial armies. If this is the case, I think that it is equally possible that the same mercenaries could have been directed against the main power by those individuals located in the liminal zone between the palatial and the extra-palatial context. In the post-palatial period, the Near Eastern oriented elites disappeared with the palaces. In this area, the new elites continued and possibly reinforced the already existent ties with the Italian ones. These latter were essential for Aegean ships' vital task to supply the communities in the new socio-economic framework. For this reason, in the new turbulent and politically fragmented scenario, the control of supply routes became of vital importance, leading again to the spread of piracy. This pattern could be inferred also by the representation of ships and naval battles on late Helladic 3C pottery, which echoes to some extent the early Bronze Age Cycladic iconographies. Finally, it is also likely that some of the late Helladic 3C elites, looking at their Italian counterparts, choose to represent themselves in death as warrior and especially as swordsmen. More in general, must be noticed that arm-filled bronzes appear prominently in elite graves. Thank you very much for your attention.